these games do not attract the crowds.
So is that what you're calling
empowerment? Unless you're Gor or AFC Leopards.
So attendance is part of empowerment.
Empowerment to me would be that now when there's like elections for team officials or whatever or things like that, the fans are actually participating in it, and it's not like a clique.
So there has to be like membership. Like if you're like, let's say if they introduce maybe paid membership or some sort of membership whereby you have a stake. And a good example here in the US is the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers is owned by the fans. So the fans have a say on, like whether a coach is getting fired. They have a say on certain things that a lot of other NFL teams don't have. So I think this might be beneficial. And then there's this former Kenyan soccer player who I think was either born in the UK or the US, retired. He's called Taiwo Atieno. He was recommending that a lot of these teams that are based in Nairobi to go to Mashinani, where they can actually, to go to not necessarily Mashinani, to go to Shags, where they can start building a base, from the people who actually live there, because there's too many teams.
We've talked about this where have a local stadium huko Mashinani.
Yeah, Mika. Quickly go through the Azimio Manifesto. The Azimio Manifesto had a bit more detail, some of the things there were some aspects where both manifestos were coinciding with each other. They were saying the same thing in different ways, but there was also some fundamental differences. So on the Azimio Manifesto on sports, the first thing they want to do is reorganize sports funding towards having a measurable impact on people's lives. So that's something that I would also need more meat on what exactly that means. But I usually like, like outcome related ambitions whereby you're looking to either improve or so, but I'd need more detail on that. And Azimio also wants to work with non-Olympic sport bodies to prioritize their long-term success. Remember that rugby is a very recent Olympic sport. Before that, it wasn't there in the Olympics. And I think a lot of non-Olympic sports were never getting the love,
the limelight,
or the attention that they needed, because there was no platform to see them on a global stage. And I think Kenya participates in quite a number of non-Olympic sports.
Right.
Yeah, with rugby being a prime example, it got to the Olympics very recently. Another sport, which is a Richmond sport, I don't know whether it got to the Olympics at some point, golf. I don't know that golf was brought to the Olympics, but there's a number of sports that Kenyans play that are not in the Olympics. So I think that was an interesting mention. Cricket is not in the Olympics.
Yeah,
cricket is definitely not in the Olympics. So that's another sport that doesn't, because Olympic sports also get, like some funding from the International Olympic Committee. And then the Azimio Manifesto also talks about improving sports management and coaching standards. That's also wide open. Like it could be so many things. They also want to integrate sports training and talent development at all levels of education through county sports talent development centers across the 47 counties. So this one I find interesting.
That one is, I think,
this one I find interesting because it mentions the schools, because the school is where you're gonna capture all Kenyan kids.
You're going to harvest.
Yes, I think maybe there's some few Kenyan kids, but in this day and age, I think all parents, even the poor ones, want to take their kids to school. So that's a place where you can capture, like a cross section of the country.
You remember we had a discussion about you remember these games that we used to have, before even you get to district, you have zonals,
yes.
But like Mashinani. So how if you're gonna
the regionals,
even before that, like it used to be whatever. And then sports day. So even like Embu, where I was in Shulai, you compete with those guys, and then from there once
you come out of that area,
out of there you go to the next one, then you go to the next one, then you go to district, then provisionals, then
Mnenda
Nashos.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah.
That way.
So I think, like when you're doing this, because these sporting structures also targeted certain schools. It's not all schools that choose to participate.
No, it's not, yes.
I think all schools should be given an opportunity from a very low level, and that can be a forum for this, whatever they call the talent development academies, to start picking talent very early. You heard, like someone spotted Neymar when he was, 5 or 6 years old. that's the kind of thing that we want to do so that we can start developing.
Or like the lady from the one who switched allegiances and became an Israeli.
Yeah, she was running in a park, and she was already a grown up.
So if in Wargadud and you guys have got a very good sports competition, healthy among schools or whatever, you're gonna get the best runners.
Yeah, from Wargadud or Bulabesa. Yes. If you know Bulabesa and you know your Kenyan.
I know Bulabesa.
I don't think you know it, but
Bulabesa,
that's also that's another part of Kenya.
You know, it says Besha, Bulabesha, Nebesha. Carry on.
All right. Yes. The other thing that Manifesto, the Azimio Manifesto wants to do is reclaim illegally acquired sports and recreation facilities. And we know this, like one of the things that made, like boxing, for example, big in the 80s.
Social hall.
Yeah, the social halls. All those things were taken away. Places like this area that was called Dallas near Tawi, Nairobi, palikuwa panaitwaje ni Mudhurwa. Yes.
Landi
Mudhurwa.
Yes.
Those places.
Landi Mudhurwa
had a lot of. Yes. Mudhurwa and Dallas. Kaloleni.
Yes.
It had social halls. All these, like big time boxers are the only African, or rather the first African to win a gold medal in Olympics boxing. Robert Wangila Napunyi is a product of a social hall.
Yes.
And you know what would be a good thing?
Yeah.
A report being done to show where these boxing halls were, these social halls
sporting facilities,
and what is there in their place and how they got to that way you expose this matter.
They should have added a line there and say, so they're saying reclaim, meaning reclaim for use, or just reclaim it?
Reclaim, and I think this is part of the open language that's being used in this manifesto. so next time when unakuja na complain, watasema, we said reclaim, but that's where we stopped. So
whether you use it or not, is it back to the same thing with us and voting?
But here's where the detail, again, like manifestos are aspirational. They also want to improve, nurturing, and they want to improve the nurturing and welfare of youth and retirees from the sports and creative industry. That's too broad for me, so I don't even want us to discuss about that. That's a bit too broad. They want to invest in sports participation by women, girls, and people with disabilities. I think this is one area where they have clearly distinguished themselves from the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto. This is not something that's talked about in Kenyan sports, and I think we have a template to learn in the US with Title IX and what it did to women's sports in America. So we would like also to get the details on how they plan to build this.
The Lionesses, Malkia All-Stars, right? Those are the two that come to mind, and the Starlets.
Yes.
Those are the three that come to mind.
And they have people with disabilities.
Yeah, and now disabilities, because now you have
Special Olympics.
Special Olympics.
Yeah, because most women who are in sports, I'll get to you, Mika. Most women who are in sports tend to quit, after high school. High school for most of them tends to be where even the ones who are very talented. Mika, real quick before I complete this.
No, I was saying Morocco is actually one of the few leagues that have a very established league.
Oh, that's
part of the free sport.
Yes, that's very true. Hockey.
Hockey.
Yes, and then Azimio also wants to establish a sports business council to develop a business strategy to improve access to finance and skill development. So a lot of kizungu mingi there.
Too much.
I'd like to know a bit more detail on that. Then another part that distinguishes itself from the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto is the one to introduce a sports cabinet secretary who will bring together sports ministers from all 47 counties to share the best practices.
So there will be there will be a sports rep from each county.
No,
or minister.
So right now, I think counties already have like a minister or what's called a county executive who's in charge of sports. I don't know whether they have one that's exclusively sports, but they have a cabinet, like a county executive who's in charge of sports. Now, what they're saying here is that they want to create a ministry of sports. They want to have a cabinet secretary for sports, because you see, like right now, Amina Mohammed, her ministry deals with
sports.
Ministry of Sports and Culture. And
so
I don't know.
Want to separate culture.
I don't know. I don't know why culture is always mixed up, because sports is always thrown into something else. kind of like what they do to gender. Like it's always thrown into something
and
else.
That is why I think it dilutes it, because it's the same thing like, we're talking about here, how sport is looked as not even a third tier in the Kamaila too, by the way.
Yeah.
And then from there you're plucked and then you whatever. Like when Keith Obama, when you're talking about how when you're talking about how your friend was surprised that KO went to sports. And so I think the dilution sports needs to be on its own. Let it stand on its own.
Yeah.
Because seriously, we are very good in this thing.
So that's the other thing that Azimio wants to do is introduce new grant conditions and guidance for institutions which place emphasis on sports. I think we're talking about, like colleges, and for those who remember, there was a time, like when a lot of even companies, some companies, like Tusker FC is an example of a team that is a product of a company. You had Rivertex.
Yeah.
Rivertex was a company, so there was a lot of companies.
Kenya Railways,
government agencies. Government
Posta.
Agencies. Posta.
Bakile, we're playing Bakile.
MOW.
The police. The police is very famous for producing a lot of athletes. So I think, like what do you call it? Like trying kuziimarisha, and making them, like more established. And when you talk about institutions, let's also talk about educational institutions, not just the universities, but I'm talking about even the TVETs, like the technical colleges and other schools that are not necessarily even public, even private ones. I know the private schools like Strathmore Catholic University, they have some sports element in them. So I think this is another very good system to try to just keep pushing up that talent slowly to get to the top of it. And then they also, Azimio also wants to strengthen domestic leagues to enhance performance in international competitions. We've seen this is something very difficult for a government to do. So I don't know exactly how they plan to do this.
KFF, KRU, those guys have everything, but they have slept.
Yeah, but even the Basketball Federation and a lot of other federations,
very many of them were melala.
Yeah, and then they talk about another part that distinguishes itself from the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto is the one to strengthen the link between clubs and fans by empowering the fans. I don't know how they plan to do that, but I think
aren't the fans already empowered, or
the fans. To be honest, the fans are no longer empowered. Like people are not going to the stadiums the way they used to. Like these games do not attract the crowds.
So is that what you're calling empowerment?
Unless you're Gor or AFC Leopards.
So attendance is part of empowerment.
Empowerment to me would be that now when there's like elections for team officials or whatever or things like that, the fans are actually participating in it, and it's not like a clique.
So there has to be like membership. Like if you're like, let's say if they introduce maybe paid membership or some sort of membership whereby you have a stake. And a good example here in the US is the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers is owned by the fans. So the fans have a say on, like whether a coach is getting fired. They have a say on certain things that a lot of other NFL teams don't have. So I think this might be beneficial. And then there's this former Kenyan soccer player who I think was either born in the UK or the US, retired. He's called Taiwo Atieno. He was recommending that a lot of these teams that are based in Nairobi to go to Mashinani, where they can actually, to go to not necessarily Mashinani, to go to Shags, where they can start building a base, from the people who actually live there, because there's too many teams.
We've talked about this where have a local stadium huko Mashinani.
Yeah, Mika.
No, I was just gonna say that is easy to talk about that, right? Because people look at the strength of FC and Gor, but ukiangalia bado FC na Gor a tribal club, but ni za Nairobi, right? Gor si ya Kisumu, FC si ya Kakamega, Mabusia, ni za Nairobi, but they're tribal clubs. It's really hard for a club to go outside of Nairobi and sustain itself. It has to make money. And in the Premier League of Kenya right now, 80% of the teams are in Nairobi. 20% are outside of Nairobi. Those outside of Nairobi are institutional teams that are owned by institutions. That traveling is hell expensive for teams to maintain.
Okay.
To pay salaries, to be traveling every week, it's so expensive. So the thing that they need to do is figure out a way on how to make, even if the teams moved out of Nairobi, how do you make the league profitable for teams to sustain themselves? The fan base is there. The team will have fun. But we shall go here. Study gani unatengeneza tu study watu wanalipa kuingia. Ni hard. Na utalipisha watu more than 50 bob.
And then in Machakos, by the way, kuna stadium.
Yeah, kuna stadium, I don't know how well it's doing, but yeah, and I think also in neighborhoods like Dandora and Nairobi.
Ilikuwa home ground ya Sofapaka.
Hiyo ya Macha.
Na walikufa. Yeah.
The stadium is still there.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so that's another thing, like to contemplate about. The other thing that Azimio wants to do is build 50 high quality mini multi-sport facilities. I think examples of multi-sport facilities are like Nyayo Stadium and Kasarani, and I don't know how sustainable those are, because building is easy, but like getting those buildings to actually benefit people.
And that is why I think Ruth mentioned this, and maybe even Maker, like when you privatize, you let somebody come in.
Yeah.
Like now, okay, I'm going to draw a comparison. You don't enough, for example, let's say MNT, the Ravens Stadium.
Yeah.
Or even let's look at Dallas, the Cowboys
Mercedes-Benz.
Or even Mercedes-Benz or whatever.
Yeah, in Atlanta.
You have a local team, the New Orleans Saints, and you guys, I'm the owner.
Yeah.
I want to build this. Can we have a tax break? Can we have a conversation?
There was a time Coca-Cola wanted Nyayo Stadium to be renamed, and the government refused because they say that name is historical. So alikata, and that's how that deal just disappeared.
But they could have still kept the name and got the sponsorship.
Well, Coca-Cola wanted the stadium renamed.
They could have.
They could have added the name somewhere.
Yeah.
You could have had Coca-Cola Nyayo bracket.
Yeah. But Coca-Cola go hardcore on these things, and they're very specific. They don't want any other name like the Emirates. Remember, when Emirates wanted to name a stadium, it's Emirates. You can't put Highbury in brackets. You can't put any other thing.
Emirates, and that is why
the Baltimore Stadium is called MNT. Yeah. FedEx Field is FedEx Field. Hakuna story hyphen brackets.
They can tower the Nyayo for that period, for that contract. Then you bring it back. What's the problem?
So these are part of the problems that we're experiencing. The other thing Azimio wants to do is create medical and insurance schemes for retired athletes and create pathways for them to support sport development programs at local level. Like a lot of very verbose.
But I agree with that. Some sort of way of these retired people to be supported, whether it's some sort of retirement scheme or whatever, like the athletes here.
Are they contributing to that retirement scheme?
They may. Okay. They may or they may not.
I just want to make sure.
So here's where we have to interrogate
or they may not. But you see, Sasa now, there has to, of course, like you've said, there has to be a way to fund this.
Yeah.
It's not going to come out of,
we need millions out there and not contributing to that fund.
Here's the thing. In one aspect, if you're a Mwamba player,
correct.
If you're a Nondis or Queens or whatever, it should be the responsibility of those guys to set up schemes such that when you finish playing, or let's say KRU, as the umbrella,
I
without even interfering in career. What the government can do is just make sure that you guys manage. Okay,
they covering, making sure that those things are
being set.
And maybe they even manage that fund that comes in.
Not even they fund, but kuna watchdog.
That's true, but somebody has to. You're right. Someone has to oversee it. And that would be them. Yeah,
but even the players and everything.
If you're playing for the country, and I think if you play for the country for X amount of time and you retire or whatever, I don't think it's a problem for us to give you money in retirement. Because you put yourself out there, but for the country.
But sana. But you put yourself out for the country, not as often as when you're playing for.
I get that. That's an
Premier League or whatever.
That's now at a club level, right? At a club level, they need to come up with some schemes.
So you see here, when you have a developed sports federation like the NBA or the NFL, the sports federation is responsible for their retired players.
Absolutely.
And that's the direction which we eventually want to
KRU, KFF, those ones are responsible. When Humphrey Hayange retires, akona pension.
Yes.
When Collins Injera retires, akona pension. When all the guys who have played for the rugby, the Cabras, whatever, they are sorted.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Okay, now the two last things they want to do is, Azimio wants to do is offer tax rebates for corporates that invest in sports programs and zero-rate sports equipment for community development. I think we've already exhausted the issue of corporate supporting sports. And then the last thing is to create a national sports research center and technology center to track performance and market sports talent.